Hey everybody, welcome back to What If Deku Was the Portal Master. This is going to be part 4. So quickly recap for the last episode. We found out that Kirishima had gotten One for All, and that Deku would be training with Kirishima to use his powers outside of Skylands, which works differently inside of Skylands. We also learned that Deku would be continuing his study of Skylands to become a Portal Master with Stealth Elf, since she never finished her studies before she became a Skylander. So, we're going to start this What If right now. And so, Deku and Chop Chop, they walk through to the portal, they leave, and they go to Skylands. At Skylands, they're walking to the academy when they are stopped by Hugo. And Hugo, he basically tells them that they have located another Skylander, or former Skylander, out near the Outer Rim. It should only take one teleporter jump if they set it up correctly, but it would be very useful if Deku were to assist in these efforts. Chop Chop looks to Deku and asks, "Well, what do you say?" Deku says, "Yeah, I think this is going to be a good idea. The more Skylanders that we can get back to the academy, the more we'll be able to put back into the book. Right?" Chop Chop agrees with this, and they go back to the library, where Hugo has a map of Skylands set up. Hugo says, "The Skylander is out here, and normally we need to take 5 teleporter jumps in order to get there. But with you here, we should be able to make a brand new teleporter that can take us straight there. However, we will need to know the identification code." Zuko is confused by this, and Chop Chop says identification codes translate to the coordinates of the teleporter. That it's what we use to make sure to keep all of the information more organized. Instead of memorizing the coordinates of every single teleporter in Skylands, we have a decoding system to make it so that each space on the coordinate grid usually goes to one character. Chop Chop writes down the identification code for the teleporter, and Hugo says, "Alright, so it should be here." And he points to a spot on the map. On the map, Hugo says that not only are these the coordinates for longitude and latitude on the map, but there's also but it's also higher than most other islands. We're having an altitude of 43. Deku is confused and asks, "Why is 43 so high?" And Chop Chop says, "Most islands usually stay in the range of 15 to 20. The altitude 0 islands are the most rich in resources such as water or plants, and usually are the largest as well. All of the islands under that are usually connected to the element of undead. But there are some islands that are more connected to the ones near the 15 to 20 altitude range, most likely getting pushed down there from one of the battles the Skylanders had from an ancient technological race called the Archeans, which we will get to after this chapter, after your next chapter." Deku wants to ask questions, but he knows that that he will be learning about these Archeans soon. So he just focuses and says, "So how am I supposed to connect these?" Chop Chop says, "All you need to do is think of the coordinates. Unless the teleporter has been moved, you should be able to create a link with something else. There's a circle stone slate outside that I'll cut to make a teleporter pad. Once I'm done that, you should be able to connect the teleporters very easily." Chop Chop then goes outside and says, "Hugo, do we still have the stone cutting tools?" And Hugo responds with, "Yes, I managed to get them away from the parts of the academy that started to drift off." Chop Chop then goes over to some kind of shed and pulls out a power saw and says, This right here looks like a power saw, but it's been magically enchanted to be able to cut through stone with the loss of the ability to cut through wood. Any and everything made out of stone is absolutely terrified of this thing. That's why I usually keep it away from any earth element Skylanders. Chop Chop then walks over to the spherical rock and starts cutting. Nico says, "Portal Master, you're going to need to understand how to connect the energies to create teleporters. Come with me. I have a small setup that you can use for some minor training." Deku goes back into the library with Hugo, and Hugo sets up this what he said was a small setup. Which is 2 miniature teleporters that are active and 1 miniature teleporter that is not active. Hugo says, "Normally we teach Skylanders how to do this by using enchanted string, but since you're a portal master, you should be able to do it naturally." And Deku says, "So Skylanders can redirect portal energy?" And Hugo says, "Not all of them. Usually they have some kind of electromagnetic manipulation abilities. Almost all of them are connected to the air element, which is surprising since these teleporters are made of magical energy. So you'd think that that more magic element Skylanders would be able to manipulate them, but oh well." Deku looks at the configuration and starts focusing on the 3 portals, trying to redirect power from one to the other, or create power in one that's connected to the other. It takes Deku about 5 minutes before he's able to redirect power. And then, 15 minutes later, he's able to connect two teleporters to one endpoint, and be able to distinguish which point something will teleport to based on the direction they're facing. Then Chop Chop walks into the library, sorry, I'm stumbling over my words because it's been I don't know why I'm so nervous. It's like first day nervousness again. Anyways, Chop Chop walks into the library and says, "Portal Master Izuku, I'm done cutting the stone. You should be able to transfer the teleportation energies now." Sorry about that, I need to take a quick break because I was far too scared and excited at the same time, and it was affecting my ability to do this properly. It was only a few seconds, so don't worry. Anyways, Deku and Chop Chop walk out of the library, and Deku puts his hand on the stone tablet, and then focuses. The stone tablet starts to glow before turning into a teleporter pad. Chop Chop looks over to Deku and says, "Great. Now then, we should probably move this to where the rest of the teleporters are." As Chop Chop picks up the teleportation pad with both of his hands and starts walking to where the rest of the teleporters are. Deku follows him, and both he and Chop Chop are able to make it to the area where the teleporters are, placing this one down. Stealth Elf just so happens to be walking by and asks what they're doing. Chop Chop explains to her that they found another Skylander and are going to go get him. Stealth Elf asks if she could come, since she is working on her confidence, so she thinks that being on missions will help with that. And Deku agrees with this, but is looking at Chop Chop for confirmation, since he's kind of more in charge when it comes to Skylander missions. And Chop Chop agrees to this as well, seeing as though he thinks that it will not only help Deku build up his own confidence and help Stealth Elf, but he thinks it's good for him to have some teamwork skills outside of just Chop Chop. So the three of them step on the teleporter, and they are sent to the toxic bogs. Just 1 second. So I went to go look for images, and it turns out that there's no place in Skylands, at least according to Google, that is named the toxic bogs, and now I are sad. So I'm just gonna use this stock image of Skylands instead. Okay, so, anyways, they are in a swamp, just to let you all know. And so the group arrives, and they see, well, almost no life. Other than a few fishes in the river, there's nothing there. And they start walking through the marsh. All of them are ready for battle, and they're looking around, looking for something, like absolutely anything, as the marsh is almost completely devoid of life outside of the water. Like, the trees, most of the trees are dead. Like, there's no animals in sight. And eventually they come across a hut. More specifically, a fishing hut. It doesn't look like there's any fishing equipment there, though. Chop Chop, he puts his sword back onto his side, but it's still semi-battle ready, and starts approaching the shed. Before doing that, he tells Deku and Stealth Elf to stay back and make sure that nothing comes to attack them. As Chop Chop approaches the shed, he can hear someone mumbling something and walking around throwing things inside of the shed. Chop Chop gets closer and closer, and eventually he knocks on the door, taking a few steps back to make so that he has time to react if there are any traps in place, which there are. Once the door opens, a giant anchor is shot out of it directly at Chop Chop, which he easily dodges since he had stepped back. Chop Chop then starts to approach the door slowly before noticing a bunch of tripwires that had tightened up. He steps back and looks a little bit closer to figure out where the tripwires are, and easily steps between them, making his way into the house. Inside, he finds a fish person, scrambling to find something, or really anything to defend himself with, since his shack is completely unorganized. And Chop Chop says, "Gilgrunt, is that you?" Gilgrunt turns around and looks at Chop Chop. Gilgrunt is a little bit paranoid. Not a little bit, he's extremely paranoid. Like, that is Gilgrunt's flaw in this one. He's become super paranoid. I do not know what Gilgrunt's voice should sound like in this one, so if you have, like, general suggestions, just leave a comment down below. But I'm just going to be using my regular voice when Gilgrunt is speaking, for now, as an FYI. So Gilgrunt walks up to him and says, "How do I know you ain't some other key and using some kind of cloaking tech or something?" Chop Chop looks at him and says, "Gilgrunt, if I was some kind of imposter, then I wouldn't have known your name. Unless I was sent to attack you specifically, but even then, I probably would have been more aggressive with my approach." Gilgrunt, he just looks at Chop Chop for a few more seconds. He pokes him, makes sure that he throws a bucket of water at Chop Chop. Like, just the water, not the actual bucket. And Chop Chop, he's startled by this, and it's like, it takes forever to get water out between my armor plates. Surprisingly longer than sand. And I even have to re-oil my armor after this. Gilgrunt finally recognizes that he is actually Chop Chop and goes in for a big ol' hug. Startling Chop Chop again. He's like, "I didn't know that you were a hugger, Gilgrunt." And Gilgrunt said, "Well, after a few years of being alone, things start to get to you." Chop Chop says, "Yeah, I know." Gilgrunt then says, "So, I'm guessing you found a portal master then?" As Chop Chop, he goes to the door and signals for Stealth Elf and Deku to come in, and then he says, "Yes, I did. I actually managed to find the most powerful, the most intertwined portal master with Skylanders." As Stealth Elf walks through the door, and Gilgrunt greets her, and then Deku walks in the door, and Gilgrunt, he instantly grabs a harpoon off the wall, not his harpoon gun, just a harpoon, and he's kind of pointing it at Deku like a spear, but Chop Chop grabs it and says, "Calm down, Gilgrunt. This is the new portal master, the Zuko Midoriya." Gilgrunt lowers his spear, looks him up and down like he did Chop Chop, and puts reaches his hand out, says, "Nice to meet you. Name's Gilgrunt." Deku shakes it and says, "Nice to meet you too." And Chop Chop says, "We're trying to get the academy up and running again. We've also managed to find Trap Shadow and bring him back. You're the third Skylander that we've managed to find so far. We haven't gotten word from Captain Flynn either." And Gilgrunt says, "Well, good riddance to him. He was always annoying. His ego was the size of his balloon." Stealth Elf, she kind of chuckles at this. Chop Chop, he pats Gilgrunt on the back. And he says, "Well, are you going to come back to the academy with us?" And Gilgrunt says, "Why, yes, of course. I just need to gather my stuff first." And Deku says, "Well, that was easier than Trap Shadow." And Chop Chop says, "You wouldn't believe the kind of places some of us have gotten into. A Chompy Bot is nothing." And Gilgrunt says, "You fought a Chompy Bot? Wow, this portal master must be pretty skilled if he was able to take a Chompy Bot out already." As Gilgrunt is holding a bag, and it's like, this, I I'd say the size of like a pillowcase if it were like filled with candy, like uh I don't know, it's just a moderately big bag, but not so big that you'd call it like a big bag. I do not know how to describe it. It's just larger than the regular sized bag, but actually I'm gonna say that he has a duffel bag, just to make things easier on myself. So Deku's like, that's everything you need? And Gilgrunt says, yep, don't want anybody tracking me. And Gilgrunt, he starts to walk out the door, and he says, whoa, gotta turn off my traps. And he goes to the other side of the hut. He pulls on a pan, and the tripwires loosen up again. And the three of them leave and return to the teleporter. And while they're going to the teleporter, Chop asks, so, what's with this place? And Gilgrunt responds by saying, well, thanks to my unnatural levels of paranoia, I scared off most of the life here naturally. The rest of is left thanks to several Archean attacks. Chop says, I might need to teach the young Portal Master about Archeans earlier than I hoped. And Gilgrunt says, he doesn't know about Archeans yet? And Chop responds with, no. We were going through the basic curriculum. He just reached the superchargers. I was going to teach him about the Archeans after that. And Gilgrunt says, well, it makes sense, I guess. You go through one technologically advanced unit to the next. Honestly, I'd say that the superchargers are a little bit more technologically advanced than the Archeans, but who am I to judge? You are the current technology expert. Actually, you are the expert of a lot of things since the Skylanders disbanded. Kind of. Once they make it to... And Gilgrunt and Chop, they just keep talking about Deku's curriculum and reminiscing about ye good old days when they were all Skylanders. And they get onto the teleporter and leave. And when they return to Skylands, Trap Shadow is waiting for them. And he says, well, you could have told me when you were going to leave me all alone at the academy. And Deku, he immediately starts apologizing, saying like he forgot, he was so wrapped up in what was going on, he's so sorry. And Chop, he laughs a little bit and pats Zuko on the back and he says, we brought back someone. As he steps to the side and Gilgrunt walks up. And I'm gonna say that Gilgrunt and Trap Shadow, they have a lot of respect for each other. So Gilgrunt walks up to Trap Shadow. Trap Shadow gets up off of the rock he was sitting on. And they shake hands. And Trap Shadow says, so, are you actually going to be staying here? And Gilgrunt responds with, maybe. I need to make sure that all of my accommodations will be properly kept safe. And Trap Shadow says, paranoia, huh? I'll need to find a way to get past that if we're gonna keep doing our friendly competition. As he and Gilgrunt, they silently walk towards the academy. And Deku says, what did he mean by friendly competition? And Chop says, they prank each other out of respect. Do not ask me why. It is just what they do. And Stealth Elf, she walks past them and says, well, I'm gonna get ready to head into class. I'll see you two there. And she runs off before using her invisibility to make herself faster, because Stealth Elf does move faster when she's invisible in the games. It's not noticeable most of the time, but at least to me, it feels like she does move faster. So, Deku and Chop Chop, they start walking to the academy as well, and I'm gonna say that, like half an hour passed before the actual classes. So, Deku, he gets to the assigned classroom, since there aren't actually classrooms at the academy right now. They kind of had to make a makeshift classroom. And he notices that there are like 5 desks instead of just 2. And he asks Chop Chop about this. And Chop Chop says, well, it's better to be prepared. We might as well have as many desks as we currently have available out if we're going to be expanding the classroom. Besides, it makes it easier to separate you two during tests. And Zuko, he's like, okay. And he walks over to a desk and sits down. And Stealth Elf walks in. She greets Chop Chop and Zuko. And she asks if she can sit down beside Zuko. And Zuko's like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And she sits down. And Chop Chop, he walks up to the front of the classroom. And he says, alright, today we're going to be learning about the superchargers. And he says, Zuko Midoriya, you already know a lot about land vehicles since you have been studying for your driver's license. And Zuko nods to this, and Chop Chop says, and Stealth Elf, you already know a lot about the air vehicles since you did have a helicopter. And Zuko looks over at her, and he mouths, you had a helicopter? And Stealth Elf, she giggles a little bit, and she says, yeah, I was temporarily put on the Superchargers team. Zuko, he's super impressed by this, and Chop Chop says, so, since neither of you have any idea what you're doing when it comes to sea-based vehicles, those are the first vehicles we will be tackling in this unit. And Deku says, alright, it seems fair. Since you don't want to start one of us off on an advantage. And Chop Chop nods. And I'm gonna say that Stealth Elf and Deku, they're doing really well. They're studying properly. They're doing well on the homework assignments, because Chop Chop does hand out some homework. Since, there are more than one class member now, he can hand out homework, and he does. Okay, he's only done one pop quiz. And I'm also going to say that over this time, Deku and Kirishima have become better friends, since Deku and Kirishima both know about One for All, but it's only Deku who knows about Skylands. He goes over to All Might and Chop Chop, and he's trying to arrange a date where he can actually bring Kirishima to Skylands to reveal his secret in a little bit more depth, as Kirishima does know that Deku is the Portal Master. And I'm gonna say that since it's been I'm gonna say about 4 weeks since all of this happened, Mina has gotten a little bit suspicious since her and Kirishima. I'm gonna say that in this What If, her and Kirishima always have certain days where they can hang out, but because of his training regiment, the time that they actually get to hang out has either been shortened, or Kirishima is just too tired from his workout to go entirely. So, now this, by the way, you can probably see where this is going, but this is going to be completely coincidental. Okay? Okay. So, one day, on one of their, hangout days, Mina, she kind of follows Kaminari. And, not Kaminari, Kirishima. Sorry if you cannot tell, Kirishima and Kaminari are, like, some of my favorite characters. So, and Kirishima, he does feel like he's getting followed, so he does pick up the pace. He also texts All Might saying, like, I think I'm getting followed, I'm gonna be take a different route to try and lose him. And Mina does catch on to the fact that Kirishima knows that he's being followed, so Mina, like, stays back a little bit more than she originally was, but far back enough that she can keep an eye on Kirishima. And eventually, she follows him to Deku Beach, where, she gets in close to, like, to this, the entrance, I guess, to the beach itself. And she's looking, and he sees Kirishima with, Small Knight, Deku, and a figure in a cloak. And they go behind, a small pile of trash. And Mina, she goes to said small pile of trash, and she looks over. And Chop, he had removed his cloak by this point. So when Mina looks over, she just sees, like, a skeleton in armor casually walking with what looks to be some skinny figure, Kirishima, and this kid that she had never realized. And mid-conversation, All Might just buffs up because he got excited, and Mina's like, wait, what? So she takes a picture of this, and she runs off. You know, she's gonna confront Kirishima about this later, and, after a little bit, like, after that, for a little bit, they continue walking for a little bit. All Might de-transforms, but he doesn't cough up blood this time, since he did it on his own. As, I'm gonna say that Chop, kind of showed him how to de-transform and store that power, in a sense. So, like, I'm gonna say that for everything that All Might can't teach Kirishima, Chop is successfully able to do it, but not as well as Gran Torino will be. So Kirishima will not be learning full cowling. He will be learning how to control the amount of one for all that goes into each limb. I'm going to say that Kirishima does have one for all now, and at this point in time they have been, Deku and Kirishima have been able to win matches. And I'm going to say that the score is Kirishima 6, Deku 4, and I'm going to say that they have also had 5 ties. So yes, Kirishima, as of right now, since Deku has not unlocked any other transformations, is stronger than Deku. I'm going to say that Kirishima can use 2% of one for all. So, Deku, he activates the portal to Skylands, and Kirishima is confused by this, and All Might, he laughs a little and says, "You're gonna see something far crazier on the other side of that there portal." And Kirishima, he looks at All Might, and then he looks at Deku and says, "Am I going where I think I'm going?" And Deku says, "Why, yes, you are." And Kirishima's excited. Like, he's heard stories about Skylands and how, like, magical it is, but he hasn't actually been there. Like, the only ones who have actually been there are Eraserhead, Endeavor, Azuku, and All Might. And that's it. That's all. So, Deku, he tells everyone to get on the portal, and then he brings them all to Skylands. Now, thanks to his training for a Portal Master, he's able to bring up to 6 people to Skylands, like 2 Skylands that weren't originally from Skylands, without getting tired. And they don't know this exactly, but they can estimate. And they do estimate that it's like either 5 or 5.5, so like 5 people plus a small child. But no, it's actually 6. So, when they get to Skylands, Kirishima, he opens his eyes because he's not used to the light of the portal. And opens his eyes because he had to close his eyes on the way to Skylands. And All Might, he opens his eyes as well. And Deku and Chop Chop, they didn't need to close their eyes. Like, it's impressive for Deku especially because he doesn't have semi-robotic eyes or just pure robotic eyes. I don't know if Chop Chop has, like, semi-robotic eyes or just pure robotic eyes, because he is an Archean. And when Kirishima and All Might open their eyes, they just see this landscape. Like, not this exactly, obviously. They see a bunch of floating islands, they see clouds everywhere, and it just looks beautiful. All Might, he says, "I've only been here 3 times, and the sight never ceases to amaze me." And Kirishima, he's just awestruck. Like, Deku gets to see this beautiful looking world every single day. And Kirishima, he starts asking questions. And Deku says, "Hey, I'm not even the most intelligent minds from this planet know a lot of these things." And Kirishima asks, "Well, how many different species live here?" And Deku, he says, "A lot. Like, you would need at least, 60 arms if you were going to count everything with your fingers. And even then, you might need to pull off some super fancy finger tricks in order to show the number, because there are so many species of living creature in Skylands." Now, obviously, Deku is, overstating the amount of things that live in Skylands, but there is still a lot of things that live in Skylands. And he lists off the ones that he knows. So he says, well, there are fish people, there are chompies, there are skeletons, there are fairies, there are elves, there are living tree people, living lava people, these, humanoid race. I don't know exactly which animal they resemble, but I know that they do resemble an animal from Earth, but they're called the Mabu. There are trolls, and this goes on for, a little bit longer. Sorry about that. I was called down to give, one of my dogs their medication. Anyways, so like, after explaining all of the races, they have actually arrived at Skylanders Academy. Yes, it has been a long time since I have used this image in the What If. Like, I think, like, episode 2 was the last time I used the actual Academy image. But anyways, Deku, he looks over to Kirishima and says, "Welcome to Skylanders Academy." And Kirishima is amazed. Like, this academy, it looks fairly old school, but with the amount of lights there everywhere, it looks super high-tech at the same time. So to him, it's like a combination of modern and sci-fi build just meshed together in perfect harmony. Well, it's more like the medieval build style is covering the actual sci-fi technology, but it looks really good. And Deku, he says, "No, this isn't even it. You see, this academy was actually much bigger. Yeah. And we're gonna be, and the more Skylanders that I find and make Skylanders again, the bigger this place will get." And he's like, "Really?" He really wants to see what Skylanders looks at its, like, maximum size, because as of right now, it may not be as big as what it should be, but it still looks big, and it looks really good. And Deku's like, "Yeah, I'll run you over the basics of this place some other time." And Chop Chop says, "Yeah, we were actually about to do our first supercharger driving test. Would you like to join us?" And Kirishima, he looks over to Chop Chop and he's like, "Supercharger?" And Deku's like, "Yeah, it's like a super powerful vehicle. Right now we're doing boats and submarines." And Kirishima, he nods excitedly. They go to the class. Chop Chop fills in Stealth Elf on the fact that Deku had brought Kirishima here because he'd been a training partner with Kirishima. And I'm gonna say that Deku had managed to build up Stealth Elf's confidence a little bit. Not by much, but it's noticeable. So Stealth Elf greets Deku and Kirishima, and Kirishima greets Stealth Elf, and they walk over to a teleporter, and Kaminari is like, "Wait, we were just here," and Deku says, "Well, we came off of that," and he points to the portal. He says, "We're going on one of these teleporters." And he's like, "Teleporter?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's one of the main modes of travel throughout Skylands. Usually it's only accessible by those who the portal master, in which case is me, considers allies. The rest of the time it's usually some kind of air travel." So they go to the teleporter and are teleported to an island that has a smaller island surrounded by water. And Deku's like, "An island on an island. This is like some Inception level stuff going on." And Stealth Elf, she doesn't get the reference. And Kaminari says, "It's an old movie from Earth. We refer to it when there's multiple things that are this fame that are happening. Sorry, I do not know how to explain Inception, but he explains it to Stealth Elf, and Stealth Elf's like, okay, that makes sense. And Chop Chop, he looks over to Gilgrunt, who was already there, and Gilgrunt, he's also been informed ahead of time, and Gilgrunt, as you know, is paranoid, so he doesn't really trust Kirishima all that much. So they bring out a submarine, Gilgrunt's submarine, and the other water element submarine, and Chop Chop instructs Stealth Elf to go with Gilgrunt, and he will go with Izuku and Kaminari. So they get into their separate vehicles, and sorry about that. So they get into their separate vehicles, and Chop Chop says, okay, Gilgrunt has set up an obstacle course underwater. Your goal is to get as far as close to the end as you can. And Gilgrunt says, there's no end. Actually, we're treating this more like a race. You're going to need to do 3 laps through this underwater obstacle course, which with each lap getting more difficult. And Gilgrunt says, this is the perfect way to put your studying to the test. I've personally changed the control scheme to make it easier for you two to use. So drive wisely. And Chop Chop says, okay, go. And both Deku and Stealth Elf start driving the submarines. They submerge under the water, and they go through the obstacle course. Now the 3 laps will be in different shapes, and there aren't any traps in this lap. The only thing they really need to do is shoot down some debris that make a wall, and make sure they go through these special hoops that grant speed boosts. You'd know which hoops I'm talking about if you'd have played the Skylanders racing micro game for the sea levels. How if you submerge yourself in water, if you go underwater in a sea race, there are these rings that make you go faster. Basically, there's a bunch of those underwater, and they go through the first lap. No one really is slowed down. They're both neck and neck. I'd say that Stealth Elf has a little bit of a lead on Izuku because of the nose of her submarine. But then the second lap starts, and there's a singular trap, which is a hand that tries to grab the submarines, and then it moves them back to a previous point in the track. And I'd say that they get caught by these a few times. Deku and Stealth Elf would both ask Gilgrunt and Chop Chop if they could destroy them. Gilgrunt agrees, and Chop Chop agrees. So I'd say that Deku gets caught by less of them than Stealth Elf, so he's in the lead. And the third lap comes, and it's straight up simulating conditions that the Skylanders would actually face underwater. So there's cannonballs being shot into the water that they have to dodge. There's rubble falling on top of them. There's some underwater turrets shooting at them. And I'd say that Deku and Stealth Elf would tie with all of these obstacles, because Deku would get the most aggro at the start, but then Stealth Elf would get ahead of him, and she'd get a lot of aggro, and eventually they'd just stick together to make sure that they could actually cover each other's back, And Kirishima, he's just in the sub, and he's watching this like, wow, this is amazing. You know, like, he's very impressed. And they get through the obstacle course. And I'm gonna say that they did tie because they decided to go for the buddy system. And Gilgrunt says, "Congratulations, you both passed." And they're shocked by this. And Gilgrunt says, even in a racing situation, even in a racing or a competitive scene, it's good to know who your allies are. Wow, I really just put an accent on him. I did not mean to do that. I am so sorry. But Gilgrunt says, it's good to know who your allies are, even in a competitive situation. That final lap of the course was meant to make it so that you have to work together. Meaning that Skylanders who were overly competitive failed. Again, sorry about that. I was called to bring the dogs out on their last pee of the night. Anyways, so as Gilgrunt was saying, you know, that last lap was to make it so that Skylanders who were over competitive failed. And they would need to retake this unit of the course. Retake this unit of the course up to this point. Every single course does this, just in a different way and at a different time. And Zuko, he's like, he's thinking in his head, you just gave me a large piece of information. You know, and Stealth Elf, she looks at him and she's like, he figured something else out. Or he's just thinking that he got a huge piece of information from something that should be common knowledge. That is common knowledge in Skylands. Kirishima, he's just listening to Gilgrunt go on and give them a miniature lecture on the sea vehicles and teamwork overall. And Chop Chop, you know, once Gilgrunt is done, Chop, he says, "All right now, I think that's good enough for today. Besides, the sun should be setting soon. You should get Kaminari home. Not Kaminari, Kirishima. Why do I get their names mixed up? But sorry, you should get Kirishima home." Deku, he agrees to this. And Kirishima, he's honestly like kind of sad that he has to go. You know, and Deku, he takes Kirishima back to Dekuba Beach. And Kirishima, you know, he gets his stuff together. He says goodbye to Deku, and All Might. And All Might says, "I think that was a good experience for him. It's good to take a break from your training schedule every once in a while." You know, and Chop, he agrees to this because Chop is also there to make sure that Deku gets his homework. Because he did hand out homework, but he forgot to tell it to Deku. So he gives Deku his homework. Deku, he's a little bit sad about this. And he goes home. He does the homework, he studies, and he tells Inko about what happened today. Well, that day. And, yeah, that's where I'm gonna leave this off. So, I am going to say this now. I will be making a mini-sode based around the general aftermath of Mina getting the picture of Kaminari with Chop, Zuko, and All Might. And I will put out mini-sode before part 5. So, it is canon, and you will need to watch the mini-sode before you watch the rest of the actual, what if. And, yeah. So, I do have a list of Skylanders that people do want to add, so do not worry. I have not forgotten about your, the Skylanders that you want me to add, and I will be adding them. I just really thought that, I should add Gilgrunt. And in the next part, I'll say, Deku's gonna actually add some Skylanders to the book, maybe, depending on how I feel. And, yeah, that's it for the What If. Goodbye.